I was at the Hilton Hotel in downtown Albany, not far from the Capitol building. It was around 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. I wasn't there as a guest. I was there to find my wife. She was with her boyfriend, though she had no idea that I knew about him. I'd been aware of her affair for quite some time, and it had been eating away at me little by little. I decided it was time to take action. I had spent countless hours thinking about what I should do. A man can only endure so much. For months, I turned a blind eye, hoping her affair would end, but it never did. Linda continued seeing Bryan Adams, all the while pretending to be a devoted and loving wife. We would talk about our future plans, but it was all a sham. She didn't mean a word of it. I couldn't figure out what I had done to push her towards another man. Clearly, I wasn't enough for her anymore, at least not as much or as often as she wanted. I considered ways to let her enjoy herself for now, hoping she'd return to being a faithful wife, but that was just wishful thinking. Once she got a taste for other men, it would be hard for her to come back to me. I waited for a few months, but she showed no signs of changing her behavior. I finally decided it was better to end it. Admittedly, it took me some time to come to terms with this decision. I worked long hours, often 18-hour days for several days in a row. Maybe this was why my wife turned to another man to fulfill her needs. Was I unknowingly neglecting her? I didn't think so, but clearly something was wrong. If I wasn't meeting her needs, why didn't she just talk to me about it? Why not tell me she needed to move on and end things? Why have a boyfriend behind my back while still telling me she loved me? Why not be mature and tell me she wanted a divorce? There were too many questions and not enough answers, so I came up with a plan. It might not have been perfect, but it was something I could live with. I wasn't at the hotel to be violent. It wasn't worth it. I wasn't going to do something stupid and beat up her boyfriend. My lawyer had warned me against it, saying it would end badly. I'd end up in jail with a criminal record. No, I was just there to end it, to put her out of her misery and maybe give her a few minutes of discomfort. You probably want to know a bit about me, right? My name is James Smith. I'm 31 years old, born and raised in the Albany area. I'm an emergency room physician at the main hospital in town, or at least I used to be. I have a mother, father, and brother who all live nearby. I also have a wife. Recently, I applied for a leave of absence to recuperate. I'm burned out. I admit it. I haven't told my wife about it because she doesn't care. My own doctor advised me to take a break to properly recuperate and not die of stress early. I've been burning the candle at both ends and sometimes in the middle. I desperately need rest. After finding out about my wife's affair, I finally decided to take a break. My wife's name is Linda Smith, née Bennett. She's 30 years old and works for a national bank in the city. We live in a nice 2-bedroom apartment near the hospital, and thankfully we don't have any children. Linda is about 5'8", with long, thick brunette hair that falls below her shoulders. She's very attractive and catches men's attention all too easily. She's easy on the eyes. We met at university. I liked her from the start. I met her in an English class during my second year. As a science student, I needed to be able to read and understand not just technical literature, but also broader texts. My main focus in that class was Linda. I asked her out, and as they say, the rest is history. After university, Linda and I lived together for almost 2 years before getting married right after I finished medical school. I managed to graduate without the massive debts most medical students face, thanks to my parents. I know what you're thinking. A rich kid complaining about his misfortunes, but that's not the case. While in school, I worked hard every summer to earn as much as I could. My family helped me out by making me promise to pay them back once I graduated and started earning money. Now my family is doing well. My father has a construction and contracting business with over 100 employees and a warehouse full of materials and equipment. I worked for him as a laborer during the summers, earning minimum wage to pay for tuition for the next year. So I know a thing or two about hard work. Now I work 18-hour shifts at the hospital and I'm on call on my off days. But you don't care about that, do you? You want to know what's happening with my wife at the Hilton? You want to know what I'm going to do about her? Well, that's about to unfold. I've known about her affair for some time now. So why haven't I done anything about it yet? That's a fair question. I went through several stages of grieving the loss of my marriage before deciding what to do. At first, I was stunned to realize Linda was cheating on me. I thought we were a team sharing the same dreams and plans. Then I found out she was hooking up with Brian. We had talked about starting a family, discussed the kind of kids we wanted, and even started thinking about names for them. We looked at houses in the suburbs, planned for her maternity leave once we had a baby, and even debated the pros and cons of her becoming a stay-at-home mom, just like her own mother had done. We opened a savings account for a down payment on the house and baby expenses. My salary at the hospital was growing rapidly. Last year, I made $120,000. I had just paid my taxes and repaid my parents nearly $10,000. Linda was well compensated at the bank, earning around $80,000 a year. Financially, we were in great shape, and my job as an ER doctor promised significant earning potential. In about 5 years, I could be making nearly $600,000 annually. We shared dreams and made plans, constantly telling each other that we loved one another. I genuinely believed I loved my wife and that she loved me back, or so I thought. Now, not so much. What went wrong? I discovered Linda's affair by sheer accident. A nurse from the emergency room was out on a date with her husband at a downtown restaurant. She had met Linda the previous year at a hospital Christmas party and remembered her face and name. She also recognized the guy Linda was with. More on him later. I watched as Linda and her boyfriend strolled through the hotel lobby and headed to the elevators. They entered one, and I saw him press the button for the floor he had rented a room on. The elevator stopped at the 12th floor. I sat down, looked at my watch, and reviewed my plan one more time. Deep down, I knew this was necessary to set things right in my life. I could only tolerate so much disrespect. And today, I was going to address this little injustice. I was going to stir the pot and see what happened. I approached the front desk and asked to call the room occupied by Mr. Brian Adams. Brian owns a local business that specializes in landscaping and property maintenance. He lives quite comfortably with his wife and 2 sons. Apparently, he felt the need to have an affair with the loan officer at the bank his business works with. My wife. Brian and Linda had been enjoying each other's company for almost 2 full years. I was floored when I found out the extent of her infidelity. The discovery happened accidentally when a nurse working the same shift as me mentioned that she had seen Linda and her friend Brian at a downtown restaurant. The nurse had been there with her husband and friends the previous weekend while I was working an 18-hour shift, dealing with the usual shootings and stabbings we see when alcohol is in full swing. The nurse knew Brian because his company had done some retaining wall work for her husband in their backyard, so the cat was out of the bag. A few days later, while at home, I casually mentioned to Linda that Karen had spotted her at a restaurant last week with a friend. I didn't mention that I knew it was Brian. I asked about the menu and the quality of the food, suggesting we should go there sometime. Linda's face went pale for a moment, but she quickly recovered and said it was fine, leaving it at that. The following week, I did a few things. I talked to my father about what to do if I suspected my wife was unfaithful. He was shocked that Linda could do such a thing. He really liked her and expected us to have children soon. From our conversation, I derived a basic plan to protect myself. We had a long heart-to-heart talk, and we agreed he wouldn't share this information with my mother. I then went to my supervisor at the hospital and shared the situation. She agreed that I needed a vacation to deal with my personal issues. She knew my wife and was visibly disappointed that Linda might have done something like this. But she also realized these things happen all too often. We agreed I could take a 3-month vacation and then review my work assignment. I even met with the in-house psychiatrist who also agreed that the stress from my family situation warranted some time off to recuperate. My next step was to contact a private investigator to find out what Linda had been up to. Within a week, they had a clear picture of what she and Mr. Adams were doing, where they were doing it, and for how long. The hotels kept records, and for a reasonable fee, a willing clerk would make those records available. While there are laws about the confidentiality of hotel records, a $100 bill handed to the porter known to the investigator revealed a history of Mr. Adams's business at the hotel for the past 2 years. It seemed he had rented a room there almost every week, regularly like clockwork and almost always with the same woman. The clerk recognized the woman in the photograph as Linda. Armed with the knowledge that my loving wife was cheating, I decided it was time to act. I knew Linda would meet her boyfriend after work, have dinner, and spend a few hours in a hotel room. She thought I had a long shift at the emergency room that day and night. Brian needed to get home to his family, so he didn't stay up late. That morning, as soon as Linda left for work, I packed up the things I planned to take with me. I went down to the garage and started loading up my bike. I loaded a few things into my trusty used Subaru Outback and asked my dad to pick it up later and leave it at his house. I wasn't taking much, but I had everything I figured I'd need for the next few months on the road. The rest of the day was spent sorting out the little things I wanted to take or get rid of. It was a strange day, like there had been a death in my family. In fact, it was the death of my marriage. My bike is a 2016 Honda Africa Twin, equipped with racks, fog lights, heated grips, a navigation system, crash bars, and a few other items that make it perfect for long-distance travel. All I needed to take with me were a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, rain gear, and an iPad. I planned to stay off the freeways and see the countryside. I decided that for my trip I'd stay overnight in budget hotels, motels, and bed and breakfasts, while eating at local spots off the beaten path. I planned to take occasional rest stops in places with plenty to see and do. My father always said that a change is as good as a rest, and if there was ever a time for change, it was now. My route would take me along the New England coast to Maine, then into Canada to New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. From there, I'd ferry to Newfoundland, tour the island, leave via Argentina, and return through New Brunswick to Quebec and Ontario. I'd then head west through the prairies and Rocky Mountains to British Columbia, take the coastal highway south to San Diego, and finally make my way back through the Midwest to Albany. I figured the trip would take me 3 to 4 months, enough time to work through my feelings and get my life back on track. I even considered joining Doctors Without Borders for a year or two, just for a change of scenery. Working in Albany's ER had become tiresome, with the constant stream of gunshot wounds and stabbings. But first, I had to deal with my cheating wife. I walked up to the front desk and asked to speak with Brian Adams. The clerk called his room, and after a few rings, he answered. I took the phone and exhaled. "May I speak to Linda Smith, please?" I asked. Brian hesitated. "There's no one here by that name. You must have the wrong number. Just tell her there's been a death in her family," I continued, raising my voice. "What?" he stammered. "Tell her that her husband died today. Tell her James Smith is dead." I could hear muffled speech in the background. "Just tell her husband is dead," I repeated, raising my voice again before hanging up. The receptionist stared at me wide-eyed as I handed her the phone. I smiled, thanked her, and walked out of the hotel. My motorcycle was parked out front. I put on my gear and helmet and waited for a few minutes. Linda ran out of the hotel into the street. It was dark enough that she didn't see me or the motorcycle as she hurried to catch a cab. She was probably headed to our apartment, her apartment now. Meanwhile, I was heading for freedom. Linda's POV. Oh my God! Someone called and told Brian that James was dead. What the hell? I needed to get home right away. I got dressed as fast as I could and ran for the elevator. A few seconds later, I was outside and caught a cab home. When I arrived at the apartment building, I ran inside. The elevator seemed to take forever to reach our floor. As soon as the doors opened, I sprinted down the hallway and struggled to get the key in the lock. I burst inside and called out for James. I searched all the rooms, but he wasn't there. I sat down at the table to catch my breath, my heart pounding. I rummaged through my bag for my cell phone to call his father. But then I saw an envelope on the table with my name printed on the front. I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper and James's wedding ring. He knows. I unfolded the paper and read it. "Linda, you can consider me dead. Our marriage has been dead for a long time, and that's why I left. I took what I wanted. The rest is yours. Do what you want with it. I have notified the management company that I will no longer be living here. You can decide whether you want to stay or move. The choice is yours. Don't look for me. I'm on the road taking a break from work, life, and your fun with Brian Adams. It's clear to me that you're no longer interested in being married to me. Enjoy your life, and I wish you all the best. James P.S. My attorney will contact you shortly with information you may or may not use. That's your choice, too." I was stunned. What was I going to do now? I never thought James would find out about Brian. There was nothing serious about my relationship with Brian. It was just fun. James works atrociously hard, and even when we get to spend time together, many things get in the way of our intimacy. Honestly, I was lonely for a man's touch. I thought James would slow down at work, and when we had a predictable schedule, we'd pick ourselves up and be like every other married couple. I envisioned us having a couple of kids, buying a house, and becoming a normal family. That plan went to hell. Brian is a very charming guy, and it was easy to become infatuated with him. The more I thought about him, the easier it was to imagine I could see him once or twice a week without it interfering with my marriage. I tried to call James on his cell phone, but the number was no longer in service. I called his parents, but his father refused to talk to me, saying only that James had left and I could go to hell. I looked around the apartment and saw that most of James's things were gone. The furniture was still there, but his closet was empty. A few books were missing from the shelf in the spare bedroom, and there were a couple of black garbage bags in the kitchen. Opening them, I saw they contained James's discarded items. I had no idea what to do. Sitting at my desk, it felt like my life had evaporated before my eyes. I had screwed up big time. I decided I would go to his family tomorrow and try to figure out what to do next. I tried calling a few of his friends, but got nowhere. They all thought he was busy at the hospital and hadn't seen him in weeks. No one at his brother's house answered, and I didn't have any of their cell phone numbers. Damn. I went to the refrigerator, found half a bottle of wine, and poured it into a glass. I sat at the table, staring at the note and James's wedding ring, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. How could I have been so reckless? Trying to think of a way to fix this, I knew any solution would come with a lot of pain. I had made a huge mess. James's story. That first night I hadn't traveled far. It was nearly 10 p.m. when I saw Linda dash out of the Hilton and into a cab. She thought I was working my usual shift at the ER, believing she had plenty of time to be with her boyfriend before coming home. I started my bike, the Africa Twin, which roared to life with its programmable 6-speed automatic transmission. This bike, with its 1,000cc engine, was built for long rides, minimizing fatigue. It was a beast, capable of high speeds and carrying all my gear. I always ride carefully, aware of my surroundings and anticipating other vehicles' actions. I've seen too many young riders come into the ER due to reckless riding, resulting in crashes, fatalities, or lifelong injuries. My destination was close, just across the river at the Holiday Inn Express. I was physically and mentally drained, longing for a hot shower, a meal, and a good night's sleep. As I checked into my room, it hit me. This hotel marked the end of my marriage and the start of my new journey. How fitting. Linda's POV. The next morning, I drove to James's parents' house, hoping to find him there. His car was parked out front, so I rang the doorbell. "Miriam," his mother answered, but immediately slammed the door in my face when she saw me. I rang the bell again and waited. Eventually, John James's father opened the door. "What do you want?" he demanded coldly. "Please, John, I need to talk to James. I need to explain," I pleaded. "You're too late." "He left Albany last night. Even if I knew where he was, I wouldn't tell you," he replied, his voice filled with disdain. "John, I just need him to listen." "We can work through this," I begged. "You expect him to just forgive you after you had a long-term affair? Get out of here and don't come back," he said, slamming the door shut. I sat on the step feeling lost. I rang the bell again, hoping he might change his mind. When he opened the door, I quickly said, "Please, just give him a message. Tell him I'm desperate to talk to him. Ask him to call me." I walked back to my car, waiting for a sign that John might help, but he didn't. I returned to our apartment, finding a letter taped to the door. It was from James's attorney, Jennifer Davis. The letter informed me that I was no longer on James's health insurance, and that our financial assets had been divided, with James's portion withdrawn. The life insurance beneficiaries were now his parents. James did not wish to have any further contact with me, and any correspondence should go through his attorney. The letter also explained that under New York State family law, I could file for divorce on the grounds of abandonment after 1 year. It was clear James was done with me. We had been together for nearly 8 years, married for 4, and it was all over. I had destroyed our life together. I spent the weekend trying to reach James's brother, his friends, and his colleagues at the hospital. I even went to the hospital where an ER nurse named Karen told me she was too busy to talk, but that I could visit her the next day. The following day, I visited Karen. She let me in and offered me a drink. I asked for water to clear my head. Karen told me she had seen me at a restaurant with Brian and had informed James. He was very interested in learning about Brian, and Karen had told him everything she knew, that Brian was married with a family, and his company had done some landscaping for her. Karen looked at me with a mix of pity and disbelief, likely thinking I had foolishly ruined my marriage. As I left, Karen mentioned that everyone at the hospital knew James wouldn't be returning to work for a while. She watched as I got in my car and drove away, feeling more lost than ever. A month later, James was in Newfoundland, surrounded by beautiful scenery and kind people, starting to find some peace. I had spent over a week on the island exploring various roads and enjoying the breathtaking scenery, friendly people, and delicious food. On the Avalon Peninsula, I encountered a moose that wandered onto the road, curious about who I was. I managed to avoid it and watched as it slowly retreated back into the woods. I had been warned about the high moose population along the highways, so I made sure to only drive during the day, while in a charming place called Petty Harbor, enjoying some ice cream after visiting Cape Spear, the easternmost point of North America. I got a flat tire on my bike. 4 different people offered to help, which was a refreshing change from Albany. I called the Canadian Automobile Association, CEA, and they sent a truck to take my bike to a repair shop in St. John's, a fairly large city with plenty of places to stay and great restaurants. I checked into a small, comfortable hotel in the city center and took a walk while my bike was being repaired and tuned up. It was the perfect spot to take a break from riding, do some laundry, and recharge. The hotel had a cozy bar and restaurant, adding to its appeal. At the repair shop, I met a woman named Sarah Pfizer, who was also traveling across the country on a motorcycle. She was from Germany and was on her way to Morocco, planning to travel around Africa. Sarah, originally from Berlin, worked for a travel company. Despite her riding gear not being the most flattering, I could tell she was stunning. She was around my age, about 30, 35, and the same height as me, 5'11". She reminded me of that British actress from the Mission Impossible movies, but with a sexy German accent. As we talked about our motorcycle travels and the experiences we'd had, I found out she was leaving in 3 days. I mustered the courage to ask her out to dinner, and she said yes. We were staying in hotels close to each other and agreed to meet at a restaurant called the Salty Cod, fitting for Newfoundland. We enjoyed our meal, drinks, and conversation, and the next morning, I woke up with Sarah beside me, her dark hair spread across the pillows. It was the best night I'd had in a long time, and for the first time in ages, I felt genuinely good. We spent the entire next day together, talking about our travels and plans. Sarah's smile, voice, and eyes captivated me, and I felt an intense attraction to her. Sharing our stories, we realized we both had adventurous spirits. Sarah had already traveled almost 40,000 kilometers and planned to drive another 20,000 before returning to Germany. She intended to tour the coast of Africa, which sounded far more interesting than my planned North American route. I considered changing my plans and even called my father to discuss the idea. My parents supported me, telling me to do what felt right for my life. My father used to say that fathers are where their children's dreams go to die, a phrase that seemed humorous but realistic once I grew up. My older brother, John, works with my dad at his construction company and has a wife and 3 kids. His wife, Megan, quit her job to raise their children, and my parents adore her. Their kids are spoiled by their grandparents, but that's a story for another time. Returning to my decision, I asked Sarah if she wanted some company on her African journey. I wasn't sure if she had a significant other waiting for her, but I decided to take a chance. He who dares wins, I thought. Are you saying you want to come to Africa? She asked with a smile. Yes, I replied. You've opened my eyes. I think Africa might be a more interesting place to visit. It's a bit out of my comfort zone, but I need to challenge myself and see what happens. But your motorcycle is here, and it needs to get to Africa, she pointed out. I quickly called the shop and inquired if there was space in the shipping container for another bike. The owner confirmed there was room and asked me to sign some paperwork. With enough money, the logistics of shipping a motorcycle were straightforward. 2 days later, Sarah and I boarded a flight from St. John's to Toronto, then to Paris, followed by a short wait in Lisbon before heading to Casablanca. Sarah, being cautious, made a few calls to a friend from her office to find out more about me before fully agreeing to travel together. Sarah's story, in Newfoundland, James was captivated by the province's stunning landscapes and warm-hearted people. I worked back home in Berlin, and my friend's husband is with the German police. She asked if he could dig up some information about James Smith from Albany, New York. It turns out everything James had told me about himself was true. My friend got back to me quickly, confirming that James was indeed legitimate. He works as a physician in the emergency room at Albany General Hospital and is currently on a sabbatical for 3 months, possibly extending to 6. He comes from a prominent Albany family and is recently divorced from his wife of almost 4 years due to her affair with a married man. He graduated at the top of his class in medical school and has no children. It's incredible what the police can uncover with little effort. I even got a picture to confirm it was him. Knowing this, I felt reassured about traveling with James. Having a doctor on board was comforting in case of any accidents, but I also knew he must be deeply hurt by his wife's infidelity to take such an extended leave and travel alone. I once had a long-term partner, and I can attest that being cheated on is unbearable. I ended my relationship by throwing all his belongings off our apartment balcony, message received. Traveling alone is different. You have the freedom to go anywhere at any time, but it can be lonely. I've been on this journey for a few months now, covering over 30,000 kilometers. I'm planning to write a book about motorcycle travel from a woman's perspective. I've been documenting everything with photos, videos, and a detailed diary. It'll take a few months to edit and turn into something worth selling. My friend back home suggested putting some of my videos online, maybe on YouTube or another social network. James has a lot to learn about long-distance motorcycle travel. First, he needs the right gear. I called a motorcycle store in Casablanca, and they have almost everything he needs. They also know other stores and outfitters in the area. Traveling with Dr. James will be interesting. I hope I can be a good tour guide. Linda's POV. James's parents made it clear they want nothing to do with me. They refuse to talk and won't tell me where he is. I don't know what to do about my marriage. It's becoming obvious that James and I are over. Should I be the one to file for divorce or wait and see if he changes his mind? What if he wants to repair our marriage? Can he ever trust me again? I felt very lonely after Brian ended things. His wife suspected something and might have hired an investigator. He was afraid she would find out and use the affair against him in the divorce. So it was over. Brian also feared James might have told his wife about us. My social life is nearly non-existent. I need to get out of the house and socialize. People at work often meet on Fridays after work, so I'll start joining them. The apartment walls are closing in on me. I need a change of scenery. James's POV. Casablanca is amazing. It's Morocco's main port located on the North African coast of the Atlantic Ocean, with a mix of old and new. The city is home to about 4 million people. I booked us a cheap hotel while we waited for the ship with our bikes. Sarah drove me around to buy the necessary gear, and we played tourists, exploring the city, eating and learning about the culture. The ship was delayed by 2 days due to bad weather, so we stayed in Casablanca for 8 nights. Some nights were the best of my life. Others, not so much. Linda's POV. Almost 2 months have passed with no word from James. It's clear he wants to cut ties with me. What did I do wrong? He was never there for me. The hospital was his only priority. I needed him too. I love him. But with our conflicting schedules, we had little time together. I have needs too. Brian stopped by the bank yesterday. He thinks his wife is no longer suspicious, and we can start seeing each other again. When I told him James left me, he suggested we save on hotel bills by using my apartment. I need a man soon, or I'll go crazy. I was hoping it would be James, but without him, I may have to settle for Brian. James's POV. Morocco was stunning, and so was Sarah. The more I learn about her, the more I like her. She's not only beautiful, but also smart, resourceful, and an excellent motorcycle rider with tons of common sense. She taught me a lot about real adventure riding. She mentioned she had a long-time boyfriend, referred to at home as a common-law husband, and no children. Her boyfriend left her for another woman, so she threw his belongings off the balcony and moved on with her life in Casablanca. I bought a bunch of new equipment here. I had to adapt to survive in these new conditions. Now I have a stash of gasoline and oil for my motorcycle, plenty of water, and tools for repairs, like fixing flat tires or broken chains. My bike has metal covers protecting the underside of the engine and extra LED headlights. I also carry a battery and cables for recharging since none of our bikes have a kickstarter. My new GPS system detects even off-road routes and connects via satellites instead of cell phone signals. I have top-notch riding gear, a sleeping bag, and an inflatable pillow for camping nights away from towns and villages. I also brought along a small gas stove for heating water and food, and yes, I can even make coffee, which is a big deal for me. We plan to stay in small bed and breakfast inns as often as possible and enjoy local cuisine. This proved interesting when we arrived in Morocco. My North American stomach wasn't ready for the diet change, so I had to stay close to a restroom for a few days. Sarah found this quite amusing, as she was used to eating from all sorts of places. I bought some pills to help with my bowel movements, recalling from med school that dehydration is a big no-no. Drinking more water helped, and soon I was fine. I received a letter from my attorney informing me that Linda hadn't tried to contact me or send anything. I suppose she realized it was over between us, or was figuring out her options. I didn't care what she was up to. I only knew that what I was doing now was what I wanted. I didn't want a wife who spent time with another man. If she wanted someone else, she could have just told me, and we could have separated honestly. But no, she had to pretend she still cared about me. What a load of crap. After leaving Casablanca, we headed south towards Marrakesh, a 250 kilometers journey on the main highway, the A3. We opted for a more scenic route through the port city of El Hadida. It was a hot day, but a fantastic ride, and we enjoyed taking less direct roads. El Hadida was beautiful. We spent one night there, then traveled to El Walidia, a coastal town where the temperature was cooler. This helped me acclimate to the new environment. Sarah had never been there before, so it was a discovery for both of us. Sarah speaks several languages: German, English, French, Spanish, and a little Arabic. In the short time we'd been in North Africa, she managed to use all of them. God, I love her German accent. It's sexy as hell. Our journey from Casablanca to Marrakesh took 5 days and covered over 1,300 kilometers. It was undoubtedly the best trip of my life. Safi and Sawira were on our itinerary before we traveled inland to Marrakesh, a city of about 1 million people. It's an amazing place, blending old and new. Since neither of us had been there before, I convinced Sarah to stay for 3 days to play tourists. We found an inexpensive hotel with secure parking for our bikes, which I checked every day to ensure nothing was stolen. Sarah wrote a BMW F800 GS, equipped with everything BMW could think of to make long-distance travel easier. I might consider upgrading later, but for now, my Africa twin was doing just fine. Linda's POV, it's been over 2 months now, and I haven't heard from James or anyone he knows. I tried several times to contact his family, but each time they shut me out. I called his attorney, but she only asked if I was starting divorce proceedings or if I had a letter for him. I didn't write a letter because I wasn't ready to divorce yet. I still wanted to talk to James and see if he was willing to stay married. He's a great husband and would be a great father if we had kids, but right now, that seems unlikely. I've had a few different guys over for one-night stands. Does that make me a bad person? Probably. But my husband left me without a word. No call, no text, no email to let me know what he's doing or when he'll be back. It would be nice to hear from him. James's POV, Africa is so different from anything I grew up with. The culture, language, terrain, food, and weather are all new, yet remarkably similar to home. The people here want the same basic things to care for their families, have food on the table, and a roof over their heads. Parents everywhere want a better life for their children, peace and security. Not every country in Africa has a stable government focused on the people's welfare, but Morocco is better off than many. Traveling with Sarah has been incredibly educational. She's a real woman with an extraordinary sense of adventure, clearly unhappy unless she's challenged. Meanwhile, I'm being challenged to overcome my own fears of new things, places, and environments. I grew up in safe, stable New York with a loving family. Not everyone has that luxury. Since going on sabbatical, I've realized that people all over the world depend on their families and friends and take pride in their homes, no matter how humble. Traveling is a learning experience, and Africa is opening my eyes in ways I never imagined. Experiencing it all with Sarah, a remarkable woman, makes it even better. She's a wonderful companion and lover, passionate, caring, wild, and living on the edge. She's not reckless, though. She's got a lot of common sense and isn't afraid to use it. I'm overcome with lust for Sarah, for travel, and for a new way of life. I don't think I can return to my old life in Albany. Sarah's POV, traveling through Africa with Dr. James, has been such a joy. He's constantly amazed by how different life is here compared to the U.S. Despite his hard work through university, medical school, and building a family, he faced a crushing disappointment with his wife, the one person he thought would stand by him forever. She was supposed to support him in his profession and their shared choices, but she lost her way. I don't know her, and I'm not here to steal her husband. But it seems she did a fine job of abandoning him all on her own. Even though we've only been together for a few weeks, it's clear that if things continue as they are, saying goodbye when he returns to work at the hospital will be tough. I have my own plan and commitments. I promised a publishing house back home to write a guidebook for women wanting to travel the world by motorcycle. It might not make much money, but I enjoy it and believe I'm good at it. James and I are heading from Marrakesh to Laayoune, a 900 kilometers journey mostly along the coast. James's POV, there's almost nothing but dust and wide open spaces along these stretches, which are both breathtaking and awe-inspiring. As a newbie, I have to respect the environment and stay alert. My American passport doesn't mean much here, and EU passport is more recognized. Border guards are often puzzled why an American is in such a place, riding around and getting dirty. One customs officer asked why I left America. I smiled and pointed to Sarah. He laughed, understanding why men do that. On our way to Laayoune, we camped for 2 nights, far from the road to avoid night thieves. The first night I barely slept, alert to every noise. The second night, exhaustion took over, and I managed to sleep better. In the morning, after some ablutions and coffee made on our stove, I felt much better. Gasoline, water, and food were our priorities, so we never passed up a chance to fill up and buy supplies, always paying in cash and keeping a low profile. Not that West Africa is particularly dangerous, but being aware of your surroundings is always wise. 2 people on expensive motorcycles can be easy targets. The journey south through Western Sahara and Mauritania was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The landscape was moonlight, dry, dusty, brutal, and beautiful. We talked through our Bluetooth helmet communication devices, with Sarah providing insights about the region as if she'd lived there for years. She's a travel magazine editor and had done extensive research before our trip. Everything was new and fascinating to me, though it was also intimidating because it was so foreign to my white American upbringing. Did I mention how mesmerizing Sarah's voice is? I could listen to her read the Berlin phone book and still get turned on. Our goal after leaving Laayoune was to reach Dakar in Senegal, over 1,800 kilometers away, which meant 4 days of intense riding. Covering that distance in the heat and dust was challenging. Sarah frequently reminded me to drink water. I used a Camelback flask holding 4 liters, which I emptied daily, plus more when we stopped. A few times I had to stop by the roadside to relieve myself, which made me laugh when Sarah had to do the same. I tried to snap a picture of her squatting, but she chased me and grabbed the phone, making us both laugh hysterically. The trip through Western Sahara and Mauritania involved lots of wide-open spaces with nothing around. We never passed a place to buy gasoline, so we carried extra fuel using it a few times. My bike, with its larger engine, consumed more gas than Sarah's BMW. I planned to get an extra gas tank for longer trips. We had a breakdown and spent 3 hours on repairs. But that's part of the adventure. We spent 3 nights in the tent, and despite the lack of showers, we managed intimacy. Making love to Sarah in a tiny desert tent was an experience, even without the luxury of a bath. Crossing the Senegalese border at Diama was easier and cheaper than at Rosso, thanks to tips from other bikers. Near the bridge is St. Louis, a city very different from the one in Missouri. The poverty was shocking, but crossing the bridge revealed a wealthier part of the city. We found a nice, inexpensive hotel near a government building with a constant police presence, reducing crime in the area. I told Sarah I needed rest after the desert crossing. Her infectious smile and laugh agreed. So we spent the next 2 days in bed, barely sleeping at times. We ventured out for food a few times and enjoyed the hotel pool. The hotel even had a laundry room, so we got our clothes in order. Now I know what you're thinking. Rich guy from the U.S. can buy anything in Africa. But most of the grand houses in this part of St. Louis are owned by locals, not Westerners. Also, everything is cheaper here than in the U.S. $50 a night for a nice hotel room that would cost $200 back home is not uncommon. I usually checked my email when I had a good Wi-Fi connection to see if my family or lawyer had sent me anything. It was mostly my mom and dad asking where I was, if I was okay, and if I was having a good time. This time, my lawyer gave me an update. Linda had written a letter asking where I was and when I'd be back in Albany. I asked my parents and my attorney not to disclose my whereabouts. Linda hadn't initiated divorce proceedings yet, which I figured she would soon, given she was the one needing sex outside our marriage, already having fun with her boyfriend for 2 years. As far as I was concerned, it was over between us. If Linda didn't file for divorce before I got home, I would. I wanted to move on, and right now I was having the best time of my life. Sarah is a wonderful woman, and our meeting in Canada was a chance encounter that turned into a wonderful accident. After 2 fantastic days at the hotel in St. Louis, we had to hit the road again, aiming for Dakar, which was only 300 kilometers away. But our plans quickly changed when we encountered a huge problem. A bus had overturned right in front of us. It looked like a scooter with a family of 5, and a propane tank had hit a pothole and flipped over in front of the bus. The bus veered sharply, hitting a truck and flipping onto its side. After a momentary shock, we pulled our bikes to the curb and took off our helmets. I ran to the front of the bus to find the family from the scooter. What I discovered was horrifying. The family had been thrown from the scooter, the father pinned under the bus wreckage, the children bleeding, and the mother unconscious with the propane tank under her. I quickly started working on the mother, who seemed to have the most trauma. Sarah's POV. James yelled at me to help with the kids and asked others to check on the father. I grabbed our first aid kits and handed them to James, who remained calm and focused. The father was barely moving and needed more strength than we had to free him from under the bus. Finally, the police arrived, but only directed traffic. James yelled for an ambulance, but they looked at him like he had 2 heads. An ambulance here? There were only a few people on the bus, and they slowly made their way out with cuts and bruises. The bus driver was bleeding from a head wound and needed stitches. The police eventually tried to lift the bus with an iron bar to free the father. When they got him out, he was in bad shape. James kept asking if an ambulance was coming. Finally, 2 ambulances arrived, and the family was taken to the hospital. James and I sat by the roadside drinking water while James tended to the cuts and bruises of the bus passengers. A high-ranking policeman approached James, speaking fairly good English, and asked why he was providing first aid. When James explained he was a doctor, the officer spoke on his cell phone for a long time before asking James to follow him to the hospital. We got on our bikes and followed the police car to the hospital, which was different from what I was used to in Europe, but not horrible. The building was old and needed updates, but it was clean enough with no trash in the hallways. The nurse James spoke to said they didn't have the capacity for another patient, so James took it upon himself to stitch up the children's cuts. He guided me through the process, and I helped him. Stitching is easy once you get the hang of it. The hardest part is getting the needle through the skin. Despite my unfamiliarity with blood, I managed to help James for what felt like hours, though it was only a couple of hours. James was incredible, and I almost forgot he was a doctor until he ran to the accident scene and started giving instructions. While most people run from danger, James runs towards it. Oh my God, we spent another 3 days in St. Louis. James spent most of that time at the hospital, attending to patients from the scooter and bus accident, and many others who had come in. I learned from a nurse that rumors of a doctor seeing patients spread quickly. So many who usually didn't see a doctor got the chance. James worked for over 30 hours without a break. I went back to the hotel to rest and clean up, while James needed another night to rest before hitting the road again. James's POV leaving town, we felt a bit sad knowing that the people there wouldn't have a regular doctor to rely on. Heading south brought new adventures. Our plan stopped was Dakar. I had read a bit about it on Wikipedia and was eager to see the city. Dakar is the capital of Senegal and home to about 4 million people. The contrast struck me. There was obvious wealth, but also rampant poverty. It was strange seeing expensive Mercedes-Benzes and shabby scooters sharing the same traffic. Yet they coexisted without much hostility. People were busy surviving, feeding and housing their families, just like everywhere else I had seen since leaving Albany. Perhaps Linda's betrayal opened my eyes to this new world, one that had been foreign to me before. Every day I was gaining a better understanding of life with Sarah as my guide and partner. I insisted we get a hotel on the beach. So far, we'd been splitting the cost of accommodations, but I knew Sarah's finances were limited. After my experience in St. Louis, I needed a vacation and was willing to cover the cost. We spent 3 wonderful days as tourists enjoying the beach. Sarah told me traveling with me made her very happy. I told her she was quietly saving my life, giving me a new lease on life. Then reality intervened. I checked my email and found one from the Chief Administrator of Albany General Hospital. Dr. James Smith, we hope you enjoyed your leave and are rested and ready to return to work. We had agreed on 3 months with a possible extension to 6, but only if mutually agreed. Unfortunately, you must return by the 1st of next month due to a co-worker's illness. We need you back as soon as possible. Please call me when you receive this. Dr. Megan Taylor, Chief Administrator. All good things come to an end, and this adventure was another victim of reality biting me in the ass. I decided to ignore the email for a few days and continue the trip. Sarah's POV. The journey south was going to be difficult and dangerous, especially with James needing to return to the U.S. We talked about me going back to Germany when he left. Then I suggested we ride further south to Namibia and travel from Windhoek to Cape Town. We contacted a bike store in Dakar, arranged to ship our bikes by air, and loaded them onto a cargo plane in 2 days. The flight to Windhoek was memorable. The plane was old, the pilot and co-pilot looked like teenagers, and the weather was windy. We were glad to land and see our motorcycles. After sorting out our equipment and paying the curators, we hit the road. The trip south to Cape Town took 5 days, and we made the most of our remaining time together. The sex with James was fantastic, and I fell in love with him. He was the hero of my story, and I didn't want to part with him. But I had to get back to work, start writing my book, and edit hundreds of hours of video. The publisher was anxious for progress, and the money they'd given me was running out. James arranged for us to fly to Frankfurt, where we parted ways. He would fly to JFK in New York, and I would take the train to Berlin. On our last night, we turned in our bikes, mine went into storage, and James's was shipped back to the U.S. It was a sad day, and I could see James didn't want to go home. At Frankfurt Airport, we were very quiet. I looked at him, and he seemed so sad. I kissed him and told him he had to catch his flight. He kissed me back and whispered that he loved me. I knew this wasn't the last time I would see this wonderful man. James's POV back in Albany, my brother John greeted me in the hotel lobby. It was my 2nd day back in the U.S. after leaving Africa. Holy hell, bro, you're looking good. Where have you been? He asked. Overseas, I replied. How did you know I was here? I have a client meeting here. Mom and Dad said you were taking a break from work and your wife, but they never told me where you went. What's going on with Linda? It's a long story. I'll come to your place for dinner tonight and fill you in. I didn't argue. It was time to get back to life here. A good home-cooked meal would be great. We chatted a bit more before I told him I had to go to the hospital to see my boss. John pulled out his cell phone, probably calling Megan to tell her I was coming for dinner, and then Mom and Dad. I was sure he wouldn't call Linda. It was a short walk from the hotel to the hospital, and it was a beautiful morning. Strangely, I passed the building where Linda worked. Dr. Taylor, the hospital administrator, was happy to see me. She even told me she had received a letter from the Senegalese government through the U.S. State Department thanking me for my services in St. Louis. She was incredibly curious about the situation, so I explained the odd scene, a family on a scooter, father, mother, 3 kids, and a propane tank. She found it all quite bizarre. I suppose the letter was their way of expressing gratitude for my help at the hospital. The ambulance chief briefed me on my duties and added me to the schedule. Starting tomorrow, I'll be working 12-hour shifts for the next 6 days. Those shifts can easily extend to 18 hours when there's a traffic accident or some other mishap. Tonight, I plan to visit my brother and his wife, indulge in their food, play with their 3 kids, and maybe enjoy a beer or 3. I knew there would be a barrage of questions, but I was ready for them. Megan greeted me with a tight hug as I walked through the front door, grabbing my coat. "James, how are you? We've all missed you," she exclaimed. I'm fine, thanks for asking, I replied. After handing out small gifts to the kids, they went off to play in the family room. All right, let's get to the main topic, Megan said, cutting straight to the chase. What happened between you and Linda? Why did you leave? It's good to see you too, Megan. I'd love a beer if you have one, I deflected. John, understanding my cue, went to the kitchen and returned with 3 bottles. Under their expectant gazes, I began. I suppose you want to know what's been going on with me. What did Mom and Dad tell you? Megan looked frustrated with my evasiveness. They haven't said anything. I even tried talking to Linda, but she wouldn't reveal anything. We only knew you took a break from work and disappeared on your own. So what's going on? Over the next half hour, I summarized the past 5 months, including some intricate details about Linda's activities. I left out the investigator's report, sparing them the full extent of her deceit. Now that her affair was exposed, it didn't seem as critical to share every sordid detail. Dinner was served along with more beer, and the questions kept coming about my travels, particularly in Africa. I shared a few stories, including one about Sarah, who was now back in Berlin while I returned to Albany. After dinner, I told them I was searching for a place to live temporarily until I sorted out my divorce and figured out my next steps. The trip with Sarah had broadened my perspective on life, making it hard to return to hospital work and fake contentment. Being back in Albany was a stark reminder of my failed marriage and how easily Linda had left me for someone else. I didn't voice these thoughts to John and Megan, but internally, thinking about Linda made me feel like a fool. She had deceived me for so long, and I vowed never to let that happen again. During my motorcycle journey through Africa, I concluded that many good women exist, women with morals and integrity, who would be honest about their feelings, instead of hiding and lying. If Linda hadn't wanted to be married to me, she could have simply said so, and we could have divorced amicably. But no, she had to lie. I took an Uber back to my hotel and slept well, knowing I had to find accommodation the next day. Linda's POV, a coworker, informed me that James was back in town. Someone at the hospital had seen him. I tried calling his parents, but their response was always the same. Back off. Desperate, I decided to stake out the hospital entrance, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. For 4 nights, I parked outside, watching the comings and goings. It was busier than I expected, with ambulances arriving constantly. On the second night, needing a restroom, I went inside and was approached by a security guard who offered directions. I inquired about James, but was told doctor names were withheld without an appointment. Frustrated, I thanked him and left. On the 4th night, I saw him. My heart raced as he walked from the parking lot to the entrance. I nearly called out, but he vanished inside too quickly. At least I knew he was back. My next step was to try to talk to him and convince him to come home. It took a few days, but I found a decent apartment near the hospital. It was a small, furnished 1-bedroom, which suited me since I didn't plan to stay long. It had underground parking and security, though no doorman. James's POV. It wasn't long before I was back in the emergency room, dealing with daily gunshot victims' accidents and stabbings. Heart attacks and strokes were common, reflecting America's obesity issue. Unlike here, Africans rarely struggle with obesity due to their superior nutrition. Given the scarcity of medical care, people have to eat less and prioritize their health. All those ambulance clients and their insurance companies were funding my paycheck. 2 weeks after I got back to Albany, I called my attorney to set up a meeting. 3 days later, we discussed the details of my divorce from Linda. There wasn't much property or money to divide, so I told her Linda could keep everything in our shared apartment. I conveyed this to Linda as I was leaving. Jennifer, my attorney, had already prepared a petition to dissolve the marriage. I instructed her to proceed. To my surprise, Linda had an initiate at the divorce herself. I assumed she'd want to move on and disengage from me quickly. After finalizing the details, I went back to my apartment, realizing that life outside the hospital would be lonely. I needed a hobby. I called about my motorcycle, but it wouldn't be delivered for a few more months, so I decided to look for another one. I spent time online comparing motorcycles and decided to check out KTM. We have 2 stores outside town that sell KTM motorcycles. On my day off, I visited both stores, looked at their stock, and chose the 890 Adventure R. I asked for a few accessories to make it suitable for long-distance riding, racks, extra headlights, a quick shift adapter, and a few other additions. The bike was perfect for both paved and dirt roads. It wasn't cheap, but what else was I going to spend my money on now that Linda was out of the picture? Linda's POV. When I got home, I saw a man in a suit standing outside my building. As I approached the entrance, he looked at his phone and then asked, "Linda Smith, yes, who are you?" I replied. He handed me a large envelope and said, "You've been served." Before I could respond, he stepped back, took a picture of me holding the envelope, and quickly walked to his car. I knew this was coming. James's POV. My attorney sent an email saying Linda had been served with divorce papers. Jennifer expected to hear from Linda's attorney in about a week. If Linda stalled, Jennifer would file a petition with a court, which would be granted after a year. Linda's prolonged affair represented an irretrievable breakdown of our marriage. If she objected, the lack of living together for the last 6 months meant we'd have to live apart for another 6 months to meet the legal requirements. Either way, the divorce would be final in about 6 months, simple and straightforward. Then my doorbell rang. Linda's POV. I had done something I probably shouldn't have. 2 days ago, I followed James when he left the hospital at the end of his shift. I trailed him to the apartment building where he now lived, just a few blocks from our old place. Well, my place now. Knowing where he was, the only thing I lacked was the courage to go to him. A few days later, I worked up the nerve and changed into an outfit I knew James liked, skinny jeans with high heels and a white sleeveless blouse. I put my hair in a ponytail, just the way he liked it. Simple, but elegant. If things went well, the jeans and blouse could be quickly removed. I bought a beer he liked, an IPA, though I didn't know what that meant. I also got a bottle of California Chardonnay for myself. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the call button for his apartment. After a few rings, he answered, "Hi, James, is that you? Who's this?" he asked. "It's me, Linda, your wife." Silence. "Can I come up?" More silence. After what seemed like forever, the buzzer sounded. I grabbed the door before he could change his mind. I took the elevator to his floor, my legs unsteady, and knocked on his door. James's POV. I wasn't surprised when the intercom buzzed. There were always people knocking, Girl Scouts selling cookies, Mormons selling salvation, politicians looking for votes. But this was unexpected. It was probably a mistake, but I let her in. I needed a moment to gather my thoughts and emotions before opening the door. In the few minutes between her call and the knock, 100 thoughts raced through my mind. Questions, anger, and everything in between. I reminded myself that I had moved on and was in a better place now. When I opened the door, there she was. She looked good, albeit tired. The woman who was still technically my wife was just standing there. I opened the door wider and invited her in. "Hi, Linda. What brings you here tonight?" "Hi, James. I wanted to talk. You've been hard to reach and even harder to find." I walked down the hallway to the kitchen. I saw she had a bottle of wine in her bag. I brought her a glass and set it on the counter. She handed me the bottle. I noticed it had a screw cap, so I opened it and poured her a glass. She pulled out a can of IPA and handed it to me. I declined, saying, "No thanks. I'm on hospital duty tonight." I grabbed a glass with ice and poured some Diet Coke. I pointed to the table. We needed to talk, and the table felt more appropriate than pretending to be friendly in the living room. Now was as good a time as any to finalize this marriage and get the papers signed. Our lawyers could handle the rest. Linda got straight to the point. No small talk, just the issues at hand. Linda's POV. He looked more serious than I'd ever seen him, which twisted my stomach into knots. "You terrified me when you called the hotel and had Brian tell me you were dead," I said, my voice trembling. "He didn't know who was calling and didn't recognize your voice. When I got home and found your note and wedding ring, I was in shock." I pulled his gold wedding ring out of my bag and placed it on the table. He stared at it like it was a venomous snake refusing to touch it. "I tried talking to your family, but they wouldn't even give me the time of day. Your father kept telling me to go to hell, and I suppose I deserved it. Since you left, my life has been a nightmare." James quickly responded, "What did you expect me to do? I found out you were messing around with Brian Adams for a while, and you thought I'd do nothing. Do you think I'm that much of a fool? Actually, I know you do. It's not like that I protested. Then what was it like? I was lonely. You were always at the hospital, never home. And when you were home, you were too exhausted to spend time with me, I explained. So that justified you cheating on me? Ignoring our marriage was acceptable? Why couldn't you just tell me you wanted out? Why lie to me for so long? James's voice was filled with hurt and anger. He stared at the table, unable to look at me. I couldn't blame him. He took a drink, then asked, "Did you sign the divorce papers?" "No. I don't want a divorce. I want us to be a family again. I'm still your wife, and I want to be your wife and the mother of your children." James laughed bitterly. "You've got to be kidding. Are you completely delusional?" "No, I still love you. I'm still your wife, and I'm not going to do anything to jeopardize that. I want us to live together again. I want us to be lovers again. I want to be the mother of your children." He looked at me with wide eyes. "Jesus, you're delusional. I'm not going to be your husband a day longer than necessary. My lawyer is ready to go to court and file for divorce without you. In New York, it's enough if we've lived apart for a year or 6 months if it's proven our marriage is irretrievably broken. You've done a fine job of making it irretrievably broken. I'm finishing what you started by cheating on me for almost 2 years. It's over. We are done. What does it take for you to understand that, James? We can make this work." "I know we can. No, we can't. You've destroyed any chance of that by sleeping with other men. This relationship is beyond repair. It's time to move on, Linda. It's over. You can go back to your life." James stood up, signaling that our conversation was over. I finished the wine in my glass, set it down, and moved toward him to kiss him. Maybe if he let me touch him, we'd have a chance. If he remembered what it felt like to be close to me, he might want me again. I walked right up to him, took his hand, and pulled him to me. I kissed him on the lips, staying close until he pulled away. It was only a second, but it was enough to realize this was truly the end. The last thing he said to me was, "Don't forget to take this," pointing to his wedding ring on the table. I took it, put it in my bag, and left his apartment. That's when it hit me. We were done. James was over. We would never have a life together. I loved him, but I threw it all away for something that wasn't worth the cost. Brian wasn't worth it. He got what he wanted, and all I lost was a husband I didn't want to lose. I was stupid. I deserved what I got. I need to sign the papers and let him go. James's POV, that crazy woman tried to kiss me on her way out. I want nothing to do with her now. She thinks we can pretend nothing happened and be together again. Have kids. She's not right in the head. The only thing that can happen now is my lawyer filing for divorce so I can move on. I needed a long, hot shower to wash the memory of her off me, so I did and then had a beer. Sarah's POV. I've been swamped here in Berlin, editing hours of video and making sense of it all. The dubbing is tough. I'm doing everything in English and then in German. Close captioning is fun, but a lot of work. This past month flew by without me noticing. I sent James some emails with short videos and pictures from our Africa trip. He looks great in the videos, even in the one where he crashed his motorcycle. We laughed a lot. I had my friend help me out. Her husband works for the government and can get information on people. Before we went to Africa, I needed to make sure James was who he said he was and not some imposter. I was relieved to find out he was genuine. Recently, I asked her to get an update on James for me. I know it's a bit sneaky, but I needed to know what was going on without asking James directly. It took about a week, but she got back to me. James is back working in the ER and his lawyer has filed for a dissolution of marriage with the court. That means divorce. The application was registered a few weeks ago, so he'll be officially divorced soon. That's good because I have some important news for him, but first, I need to take care of a few things back in America. I sincerely hope my news will please him. James is POV. Yay, I'm divorced. It's official today. I have the papers in my hand. Thank God. Now I feel like I can finally move on with my life and start doing the things I want to do. But first, there are a few things I need to figure out. Sarah keeps calling and writing letters, updating me about her book and videos. She sent me several clips, mostly of me doing silly things like throwing my bike or almost running into a herd of cows because I was distracted. The cows and the bike were fine, but my writing partner laughed his head off. I told her about my life, the visit from Linda, and how she hoped I'd forgive, forget, and take her back. Linda's disrespect had been the last straw. Once I learned the extent of her affair, there was no going back. Sarah listened patiently to my rants. I realized she was tired of my problems and wanted to tell me something. She said she'd send me an email soon, mentioning she had an announcement for me in a couple of weeks. I figured it was about her book. Sarah's POV. I need to tell James my news, but not while he's still upset with his ex-wife. I need him to focus on me. Maybe just a little more time. James's POV. It's been a week since the divorce was finalized, and here I am at Albany Airport about to board a flight to O'Hare in Chicago, then Heathrow, and finally Berlin. It's a 15-hour journey, and I'll arrive tomorrow around noon. I need to see Sarah. It's been almost 2 months, and I need to find out if there's anything left between us after our time in Africa. If not, I'll return to my life and figure out my next steps. Doctors Without Borders is recruiting, looking for doctors for various parts of the world. The pay isn't great, but I'll manage somehow, even with my student loans. I landed at Berlin-Brandenburg Airport, went through customs, picked up my bag, and hailed a cab. I booked a room at the Parkview Hotel in the Alexanderplatz district. It's a nice hotel, much fancier than the place Sarah and I stayed at in Africa. After checking in, showering, and grabbing a bite to eat, my task was to find the building where Sarah worked. I knew it was downtown, but had no idea how to get there. Thank goodness for Google Maps. It was almost 4 p.m. when I reached her building. If Sarah didn't want to see me, I'd play tourist for the rest of my stay. I tried to manage my expectations about how she'd react to me showing up unannounced. Surprisingly, her building was only a 15-minute walk away. Inside, I found her office in the directory and took the elevator up. I approached a very attractive young woman at the reception desk. She greeted me in German, and I smiled, asking if I could see Sarah Brown. The receptionist's eyes widened and her eyebrows shot up. She made a quick phone call, then told me, "Sarah or someone else will be here in a minute. Please have a seat." As I sat in a soft leather chair, she made another call, this time whispering in German. I thought I heard her mention American a few times. Several women passing by glanced at me, making me feel scrutinized. Do they really do this to every visitor? Or am I an unusual case? A very attractive woman approached me. "Dr. Smith," she asked. I nodded and she said, "Follow me, please." It wasn't hard to follow her slender figure in a tight skirt and high heels, clicking on the polished granite floor. I realized I had told the receptionist my name was James Smith, not Dr. Smith. They knew more about me than I realized. We walked through corridors lined with glass and steel offices. Women glanced at me and I discreetly checked my fly. It was fine. Was there an announcement about a strange American in the building? After what felt like a long walk, I saw Sarah come around the corner, her face lighting up with a smile. She ran the last few steps, hugged me tightly, and kissed me on the lips. People were watching us now. "My goodness, James! When did you get to Berlin?" she exclaimed. "A few hours ago, I went to the hotel and cleaned up before coming here. I didn't want to look like a vagrant and get thrown out by security," I joked. I expected her to ask why I was here to see if we were still acquaintances, or if our time in Africa meant something more. Sarah took my hand, and we headed to the editing room where she was working. She wanted to show me the videos she shot during her travels. Sarah was wearing a flowing black skirt, a long-sleeved white blouse, and modest heels. She looked so different from the motorcycle gear I was used to seeing her in, and she was naked, which was my favorite look for her. My best memories were split between being with a naked Sarah and exploring parts of the world that had been a mystery to me since childhood. The naked memories were definitely better. I'm a man, after all. I decided to go with the flow and see how things went over the next few hours. We talked about her book and the videos, some of which would be on YouTube, while most would be on the publisher's website for subscribers. "Do you have time for dinner?" I asked. "I'd like to catch up and share what's been going on with me. How long can you stay? I can stay for a few days. My return flight is in 3 days, but I can easily change it if needed." "What do you have in mind?" Sarah asked. I wasn't sure where she was going with this. Was she considering staying longer, or was she figuring out when she could get rid of me? I didn't want to be like the remains of a fish dish discarded quickly before it starts to stink. I'd had enough of women pretending to care about me, so I was on my guard. "I want you to meet my family," she said. "I've told them a lot about you, and they are looking forward to meeting you." Her response took me by surprise. "Oh, well, I suppose I can do that, but first I need to eat and I'd really like to try a good German beer. I can leave and meet you after you're off work." No, you won't. I'm leaving now with you. It's been months since I've seen you, and I have important news. As we walked out, people's heads turned to watch us go by. Sarah held onto my hand as we walked back to my hotel. On the way, I asked her where she lived, wondering briefly if she had a husband she hadn't mentioned. The last thing I wanted was to be the other person. It would have been easy to hide that kind of information while traveling in Africa, but once she got home, reality would catch up quickly. I realized I didn't know as much about Sarah as I needed to. I might want to meet her family, but I needed to know more first. When we got to the hotel, we went up to my room and Sarah grabbed me, and we started kissing passionately. Our clothes seemed to melt away, and soon we were naked on the bed. My mouth and hands reacquainted themselves with her, and she felt both familiar and new. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed her touch. For the last few months since returning to Albany, I felt like I'd been holding my breath. Now I could breathe again. She seemed perfect to me, and I couldn't believe that just a few days ago I'd been trapped in a nightmare marriage. Here I was, already with a woman who made me feel alive again. I didn't want it to end. It was almost 9 p.m. when we finally surfaced to shower and eat. We didn't go far. The hotel had a good restaurant, and it was hard not to find good beer in Germany. Sarah ordered a Diet Coke, which was strange because she liked beer. "So why does your family want to meet me?" I asked. "I told them about you and our travels together in Africa. They're very eager to meet you since you're from the United States. I've also told them about my travels in Canada. My parents have visited the U.S. several times to see my aunt in Florida. She lives near Tampa, and she loves the beach, especially since she has arthritis." Sarah explained with a laugh. "We can go to my parents' house tomorrow if you want. We'd have to take the train. It will take about 6 hours." "Where do they live?" I asked. In the South, my father worked as an engineer at Volkswagen, developing production systems. He can talk about it for hours, but I find it boring. "My mom is a retired accountant," she said. "I'll call them and tell them we're visiting." I decided it was best to go with the flow, at least for now. The conversation turned to me. "So, you're now officially a free man," she said. I smiled broadly. "Yes, and I have the paperwork to prove it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, folded several times. I placed it on the table. "I am a free man." Sarah looked at it. "I've never seen one of these before." "Congratulations. How does it feel?" "It feels good. It was inevitable once I found out she'd been having an affair for almost 2 years. She didn't want to be with me. If she did, she wouldn't have done what she did for so long." I shrugged and sipped my beer. "So what do you want to do now?" she asked, clearly interested. There was a definite motive behind her questions, I thought. She was dragging me several hundred miles to introduce me to her family. I felt like I was being evaluated. For months, we had shared an intimacy common among deeply committed couples. Perhaps it was a German trait to quickly become sexually involved after getting to know each other. But no, it was something else entirely. "I'm not sure how much longer I want to stay in Albany," I admitted. "The hospital wants me back and will pay me well, but there's too much history there. I need to find another part of the world to explore. You've given me the travel bug, you know. It's mostly your fault." I grinned. Sarah smiled back. We spent the night in my hotel room, and the next morning we went to Sarah's apartment so she could pack. She made a few phone calls, and then we took a cab to the train station. I liked the trains in Europe. They ran on time, were easy to access, and had less paranoid security than airports. We found our seats and settled in. When we arrived, we were met by a couple in their 60s. Sarah looked a lot like her mother, same eyes and hair, but she had her father's smile. We headed to find her father's car, a Passat station wagon. Their house was old, but in excellent condition, with a thoroughly renovated interior featuring modern appliances and conveniences. I complimented her father, Michael, telling him my father was a builder and would have approved of the work he had done. Michael seemed to grow taller at the compliment. I was offered a beer, and Sarah went to get drinks for everyone. As we sat down, her parents screamed, "Tell us all about yourself." They started with, "So you're American? Where in America?" "Albany, New York, north of New York City, about 2.5 hours away," I replied, trying to be as charming as possible. They say first impressions last, so I used all the manners my parents had taught me. Thank goodness Sarah came back with the drinks, a beer for Michael and me, red wine for her mother, and a glass of ice water for herself. As we settled in the living room, the silence grew a bit uncomfortable, and I could feel her parents' eyes boring holes into my head. I realized that if I wanted to make it through the next hour, I'd need to start a conversation. The best way to break the ice is to get people talking about themselves, so that's what I did. Although I knew they were curious about me, I turned the conversation towards them using the little information Sarah had given me. It didn't take Michael long to get going. He launched into a detailed discussion about the high quality of engineering and Volkswagens and other impressive cars they manufacture. Sarah's mother, Elizabeth, was more reserved. She had spent many years working for a large accounting firm, mostly in auditing. She retired when Michael did, and they planned to travel, especially to warmer places. They dreamed of buying a vacation home in Spain or Greece, somewhere on the coast, to escape the harsh German winters. They had friends who did the same, so they hoped to find a spot nearby. Listening to them, I couldn't help but notice the similarities to my own family. My parents had bought a large van with a big diesel engine to travel around the country, aiming to spoil their grandchildren. They expected me to add to the family, along with my brother's children, but that didn't happen. As a big dinner was being prepared in the kitchen, Michael continued his enthusiastic monologue about German engineering and beer, while Sarah kept a close eye on me. Michael proudly mentioned that he was the reason Sarah got into motorcycle. He had owned motorcycles most of his life and still had a BMW 1200 in his garage, along with a smaller bike for local trips. The big BMW was for long-distance travel, and Elizabeth often accompanied him on his journeys. Though they didn't travel as much as they used to, they still enjoyed it. Tomorrow, he planned to show me his motorcycles. But tonight, we were having dinner. It felt like I was under intense scrutiny, like a job interview, with questions about my life goals and future plans. I was prepared to be assigned a separate bedroom from Sarah, so I was a bit surprised when Elizabeth had set out fresh towels for both of us in the same room. When we got into bed, I decided to keep things respectful and left my underwear on. Sarah noticed and asked, "Why are you doing that?" Pointing at my boxers, I explained, "Because we're at your parents' house and it doesn't feel right to get naked here." She laughed and said, "They've slept naked all their lives. Take them off. I haven't seen you in months and I want you close." As I whispered in her ear, I asked, "How long?" Sarah didn't move. "How long?" I repeated. "How long what?" she asked. "How many weeks? You remember I'm a doctor, right? I know what a pregnant woman looks like. I'm pretty sure you're pregnant. There's a small bump forming, so I'm guessing around 3, maybe 3.5 months. Sarah looked shocked. "I did the math, and it hit me. I was going to be a father." Sarah smiled, got up, and retrieved a plastic test from her bag, showing me 2 blue stripes. My world changed in that instant. She told me she saw a doctor in Berlin about a month ago and had an ultrasound appointment in a week. I had come to terms with the idea that Sarah and I might just be friends, not lovers, due to time and distance. But a part of me still hoped for a connection, and this news rekindled that hope. I got up and went to my bag, fumbling for something I had brought just in case. I returned to the bed, took out a small box, and opened it to reveal a ring. "Will you marry me?" I asked. Her face lit up with joy, and she exclaimed, "Yes, yes, yes." We hugged tightly, and I realized we needed to share the news. I quickly got dressed and opened the door to find her parents standing in the hallway looking surprised. "We'll be right out," I said. Sarah dressed quickly, and we went to the living room to announce our engagement. Of course, Elizabeth already knew her daughter was pregnant. Mothers always do. Surprisingly, Michael was not upset about his daughter marrying an American. 2 days later, Sarah and I returned to Berlin by train. We had a lot to do, and I wanted to be with her for the ultrasound appointment. Sarah's POV. James spent some time on the phone with his hospital, and of course his family, to share our exciting news. His mother and father shouted over the commotion caused by his brother, his wife, and their children. I caught phrases like, "James is marrying that German girl he was with in Africa." They were ecstatic about the news, especially since I was pregnant. I was next in line for a break, but I informed the publisher that I would continue working on the book from home and do as much video work as possible. When we went in for the ultrasound, we got some truly surprising news. The doctor moved the wand over my abdomen, searching for a heartbeat. After a few seconds, James's eyes locked on the monitor, and a smile spread across his face. I knew everything was all right. The doctor made a few buzzing noises and then let us hear the heartbeat. That's when the real surprise hit. James exclaimed, "Oh, wow," which caught me off guard. The heartbeat sounds were fast. James looked at me and said, "We're having twins." The doctor smiled and I burst into tears. James and I were married in Berlin with Elizabeth, Michael, a few friends, and some colleagues from the publishing house, about 30 people in total, James's POV. When I arrived at the office, word quickly spread among the women that the American Sarah had been talking about was finally here. They were eager to see the doctor who rode a motorcycle. There were many decisions to make. We decided to move to Albany to be closer to my family and to give Elizabeth and Michael a place to visit often. I negotiated with the hospital to work shorter shifts for less pay, which was fine by me since I wanted to spend every spare moment with my pregnant wife. The next few months were hectic. Sarah's belly grew larger, and we found a nice 4-bedroom house perfect for raising children, just a short drive from my brother's place. Megan and Sarah were already busy decorating and planning for the growing family. My wife, Sarah Elizabeth Brown Smith, gave birth to beautiful twin girls, each weighing almost 6 pounds. Our lives became a whirlwind of feeding, changing dirty diapers, and more feeding. Sleep became a distant memory. Elizabeth and my mom competed fiercely to be the best grandma, while my dad and Michael tried to outdo each other in house design and construction. They had grand plans for renovating and expanding our home, and I couldn't keep up with them, nor did I try. Just when you think life has knocked you down, something good can come from it. I lost my wife because of her infidelity, a woman I loved and believed loved me back. She hid her betrayal for a long time, which ultimately ended our marriage. I felt guilty, but she chose to date another man, not realizing the consequences of her actions. Meeting Sarah was a stroke of luck. If I hadn't gotten a flat tire in Newfoundland while eating ice cream, I might never have met her. Who knows where I'd be today? But meeting her was the best thing that ever happened to me. I have a new life, a wonderful wife, 2 children, and a promising future. Sarah's POV. After moving to America, I was out shopping with my sister-in-law, Megan, for children's furniture at IKEA. One woman stared intently at Megan, clearly recognizing her. Megan turned and greeted her. "Hi, Linda." That was it. No pleasantries, just straight to the point. I knew who Linda was, of course, but had never seen a picture of her. She was James's ex-wife, the one he had an affair with for a long time until he discovered her cheating. Linda greeted Megan. "Hey, Megan, how's it going?" I turned around, my huge pregnant belly on full display. I wanted to see what she looked like, and she was quite pretty. Megan looked at Linda and said pointedly, "Linda, this is Sarah. She's James's wife, and we're shopping for baby furniture." There was no mistaking the message. She wanted Linda to know exactly what she had lost. "She's having twins," Megan added. With that, she gently took my hand, and we walked away. Megan quietly muttered under her breath as we left. We picked up our purchases from the warehouse and helped Megan and John load them into the truck. We had a snack, and Megan filled me in on Linda's story and her foolishness. Most of it I already knew, but it was enlightening to hear it from a different perspective. James's family never spoke of her. She was old news, best forgotten. That night, when James came home, we made love. I loved being naked with him, and it always had the same effect on him. I dreamed of us riding motorcycles and traveling, though I wasn't sure if that would happen anytime soon. James's parents had a huge motorhome and had offered to lend it to us for traveling with the little ones. The motorcycles might gather dust for now, but I'll think about it. It could be fun.